Smile for us, sweetheart, or maybe we'll make you. The words dripped with menace as Rex Malone's gang closed in, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Rex himself grabbed Claire Donovan by the collar, yanking at her shirt to humiliate her in front of the crowd. The bar fell silent. Rex Malone's hand had just torn Claire Donovan's shirt, and in that instant, the room froze. Because what he revealed wasn't weakness. It was the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps, etched across her back, scarred by battles he couldn't imagine. Every veteran in the room gasped, and the bikers realized they weren't facing a waitress. They were facing Force Recon. Donovan's rest stop wasn't the kind of place you noticed on a map. It was a squat building off Highway 76, the kind of desert road where sand whipped across the asphalt in little ghosts, and the only landmarks were weathered billboards promising beer, burgers, and a break from the sun. The paint on the bar's wooden siding had long since faded into a tired beige, and the neon sign above the door flickered like it was fighting to stay alive. Still, for the locals and the Marines stationed nearby at Camp Pendleton, it was a refuge. Inside, the air carried the smell of fried food, stale beer, and cigarette smoke that seemed baked into the walls themselves. Tyler Grant worked the bar most nights. He was only 25, still lean and restless, his face betraying more eagerness than experience. Every time the front door creaked open, Tyler's head snapped toward it, half expecting trouble. He'd seen his share of rough customers, but he lacked the calm that comes with years of knowing when to stand tall and when to step back. Yet what Tyler lacked in confidence, he made up for in loyalty. He knew the regulars by name, and he worked twice as hard when the crowd grew restless. Still, if a storm ever truly broke inside Donovan's, Tyler would be the first to look toward Claire Donovan for a cue, even if he didn't quite understand why. Claire kept to routines that most people overlooked. She moved through the bar with quiet precision, her sneakers padding softly on the worn wooden floor. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, her white shirt loose, almost nondescript. To the casual eye, she looked ordinary. Another woman making a living by wiping down tables and ferrying drinks between the bar and the booths. Yet to anyone paying attention, there was something in the way she carried herself. She never kept her back to the door for long. She arranged the condiment bottles in exact rows, folded napkins into identical triangles, and polished glasses until they caught the amber light above the bar like mirrors. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, but unmistakably deliberate. Most patrons never thought about it. They saw a quiet woman avoiding the spotlight, a person who didn't demand attention and therefore seemed forgettable. But that forgettability was the point, and it raises a question worth pausing on. How often do we overlook people precisely because they don't try to impress us? In a world obsessed with those who shout the loudest, who dress the brightest, who make themselves impossible to ignore, what about the ones who step back, choosing calm over noise? Too often we mistake silence for weakness. We assume invisibility means insignificance. But think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever underestimated someone, a teacher, a coworker, maybe even a family member, because they never made a show of themselves? And then, when the moment came, they revealed a depth of strength or resilience or wisdom you never imagined. Claire Donovan embodied that truth. She wasn't hiding because she had nothing to give. She was hiding because she had already given more than most could imagine. And on that quiet night at Donovan's rest stop, while Tyler nervously dried glasses and the jukebox hummed with an old country tune, no one in the room realized just how much history walked among them in sneakers and a ponytail. The sound came first, a low, rolling thunder that didn't belong to the desert sky. Heads turned toward the front windows, catching the flicker of headlights and the growl of engines pulling off the highway. The Desert Vultures motorcycle club had arrived. Their patch, black and red, a vulture clutching a skull, was enough to make most people turn back toward their drinks. The riders parked in a jagged row, dust swirling around their boots as they dismounted. Boots hit the gravel with a heavy finality, and when the door to Donovan's rest stop swung open, the air inside shifted. Conversations faltered. A jukebox song seemed to drop in volume, as if the machine itself didn't want to challenge the newcomers. At the head of the group walked Rex Malone, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar slicing down one cheek like a permanent warning. Rex carried himself the way a storm carries lightning, inevitable and dangerous. His arms were thick with ink, but the one that always drew attention was coiled around his forearm. A snake, mouth open, fangs ready to strike. He liked to flex it when people looked too long, just to remind them that danger wasn't just decoration. Rex didn't need to raise his voice. His silence carried weight, and when he finally did speak, it was the kind of gravelly command that told you he was used to people obeying. The Desert Vultures spread through the bar like they owned it, slamming stools back, laughing too loud, demanding attention. Tyler stiffened behind the counter, polishing rag frozen in his hand. He was young, but he wasn't naive. He'd heard stories about these men, the bar fights that ended with broken jaws, the debts collected with chains instead of contracts. Still, his eyes flicked once toward Claire Donovan, who was refilling a tray of glasses at the far end of the room. She didn't flinch, didn't even look up, though her shoulders squared ever so slightly. The veterans sitting in the corner booths noticed more than most. These weren't just rowdy bikers. The Desert Vultures had a reputation for pushing too far, for testing boundaries until fear bent people into compliance. And if a place resisted, they'd escalate until compliance arrived in another form: pain, destruction, sometimes worse. A retired gunnery sergeant nursed his beer in silence, watching Rex with a soldier's eye. He recognized the weight of menace, the way intimidation was used like a weapon. He also recognized its flaw. Here's the truth about intimidation: it works until it doesn't. Human beings are wired to read threats, to calculate danger, and most of the time, the loudest, most dangerous figure gets what he wants. That's why Rex Malone could walk into a room and watch men avert their eyes. Why he could toss down a bill smaller than the tab and no one dared call him out. Intimidation thrives in the gap between fear and action. If everyone believes someone else will resist, no one does. And so the cycle of dominance continues. But history, in countless battles, prove another truth. Intimidation collapses the moment someone refuses to play along. A soldier who doesn't break under interrogation shifts the entire balance. A community that stands up to a gang suddenly removes the fuel from the fire. Because intimidation is less about real power than it is about borrowed fear. Once fear is removed, the threat dissolves into something smaller, almost pitiable. That night at Donovan's, intimidation still worked. Patrons lowered their voices, hands shook as they lifted glasses, and even Tyler avoided direct eye contact with Rex as the biker leaned across the bar, snake tattoo glinting under the overhead light. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. The veterans watching from their booths remembered too many moments when a bully's strength evaporated at the sight of true resolve. And Claire Donovan, quiet, ordinary Claire, was the living embodiment of that principle. She hadn't revealed it yet. She hadn't given them a reason to look twice. But the calm in her movements, the steadiness in her breath, spoke volumes to anyone who knew what to look for. Rex Malone thought he was walking into just another bar to own with his presence, his snake tattoo, his practiced scowl. He had no idea that within these worn desert walls, intimidation was about to meet its natural limit. And when intimidation fails, it doesn't just fall quietly, it collapses with the kind of noise you never forget. If you asked anyone at Donovan's rest stop to describe Claire Donovan before that night, they'd probably say the same thing: quiet, polite, almost invisible. She poured drinks without chatter, cleaned tables without fuss, and carried herself like someone trying to take up less space in the world. Yet anyone who truly observed her would notice something else entirely. Claire didn't just move, she moved with precision. Every action, every gesture, carried the ghost of a discipline most civilians never touch. Take the way she folded napkins. To Tyler, the young bartender, it just seemed like a quirk: triangle folds, each corner perfectly aligned, stacked in even piles. But to a trained eye, it was habit. The kind of repetitive order drilled into you by years of routine. Field gear packed just so, maps folded the same way every time, weapons stripped and reassembled until muscle memory replaced thought. Claire wasn't folding napkins. She was rehearsing order against chaos, or the way she wiped down tables. Most servers leaned on one hip, dragging the cloth in lazy circles. Claire worked in grids, left to right, top to bottom, never missing an inch, finishing with a slight pivot to keep her line of sight open. She did it unconsciously, but Sheriff Callahan had noticed more than once. He'd been a soldier too. He recognized the difference between someone cleaning a table and someone maintaining a perimeter. And perhaps most telling of all, Claire never turned her back to the door for more than a few seconds. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't make it obvious, but her body seemed magnetized to the entrance, as if an invisible wire kept tugging her eyes there. Even while carrying trays, she adjusted her stance to keep the exit within her peripheral vision. Most customers would call it coincidence. Any veteran would call it survival instinct. Here's the thing about habits forged in combat. They don't disappear when the uniform comes off. A veteran can spend years in civilian life, yet their brain still calculates angles, exits, and threats faster than most people realize. Some call it hypervigilance, others call it scars of service. For many, it's both. To live that way is exhausting, but it also means you notice what others miss. Claire probably didn't even register what she was doing anymore. Her body carried the discipline of long patrols in hostile territory, the awareness of a sniper waiting for a silhouette, the muscle memory of someone who knew how quickly safety could vanish. Civilians around her saw an ordinary woman in sneakers and a ponytail. Veterans saw the subtle signs of someone who had been there. And that's why, on the night Rex Malone swaggered into Donovan's rest stop, Claire's quiet precision wasn't just background noise. It was the calm before revelation. While others shrank under intimidation, she was already reading the room, cataloging weaknesses, noting escape routes. The habits that haunted her were the very habits that would soon shift the balance. The Desert Vultures had settled into Donovan's rest stop like a storm cloud spreading across the horizon. Chairs scraped against wood, boots thudded against the floor, and Rex Malone finally fixed his gaze on Claire Donovan. He rose from his stool with a slow, deliberate swagger. The snake tattoo on his forearm twisted with each step, as if alive in the bar's dim amber light. Claire was wiping down an already clean table, her shoulders relaxed, her eyes lowered in that same quiet composure that seemed to irritate men like Rex more than open defiance ever could. "Hey, sweetheart," Rex drawled, his voice heavy with mock charm. "Where's Murphy? We've got business. Protection money doesn't collect itself." Tyler froze behind the counter, rag clenched in his fist. Patrons glanced at one another, shifting uneasily in their seats. Everyone knew what protection meant. Everyone knew what happened to the last bar that refused. But Claire didn't flinch. She set down her cloth, turned slightly to keep Rex in view, and answered in the same steady tone she might use to take an order. "Mr. Murphy's out of town this week. I just served tables." Her words were careful, neutral. Neither submissive nor confrontational. She was giving Rex a way out, an off-ramp from the performance of intimidation he was staging. But men like Rex didn't look for exits. They looked for control. "Then you'll tell him," Rex said, stepping closer, towering over her, "that the Desert Vultures offer a deal he can't refuse. $5,000 a month and no accidents." He flicked open a lighter with a metallic snap, the flame flaring briefly before he closed it again. Because accidents happen all the time, don't they? Gas leaks, electrical fires. He leaned in, his breath sharp with whiskey. "Wouldn't want this fine place to burn down, would we?" The room's air tightened like a drawn bowstring. Tyler's hand drifted toward the bat behind the bar. Sheriff Callahan shifted in his booth, his eyes narrowing. The veterans at the corner tables watched, each one reading the body language, seeing what Rex couldn't. The subtle way Claire's feet repositioned, the tension in her shoulders, the readiness coiled inside her calm. "I'll let him know you stopped by," Claire replied softly. It was the wrong answer for a man who thrived on fear. Rex snarled, his patience burned out. With one hand, he grabbed the collar of her shirt and yanked, meaning only to shake her, to humiliate her in front of the crowd. The fabric tore with a sharp rip that echoed louder than the jukebox, and in that instant, the room froze. The torn shirt slipped down, bearing Claire's back. Across her shoulder blades stretched the unmistakable emblem, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. Beneath it, jagged scars cut across her skin, pale reminders of blades, shrapnel, and fire. It wasn't just ink. It was history. Veterans gasped, some audibly whispering, "Force Recon!" Tyler's eyes went wide, his mouth falling open. Rex's hand, still clutching the torn fabric, faltered as he registered what he had exposed. The men who moments ago laughed now stood silent, confidence draining from their faces. And here's the commentary that matters. Tattoos and scars aren't decorations. They're silent archives. Every line of ink, every mark on the skin, tells a story that words often fail to capture. For civilians, tattoos might mean rebellion or fashion. For warriors, they can mean brotherhood, identity, survival. And scars are the body's permanent testimony, carved into flesh when memory alone isn't enough. They speak of nights when survival seemed impossible, of friends who didn't make it home, of the steep cost of carrying others to safety. Claire's back wasn't a canvas. It was a battlefield map, one etched in pain and pride. Rex Malone had tried to strip her dignity with force, but instead he revealed the truth. The woman he thought was powerless carried more strength and history in her skin than he'd ever wielded in his fists. The bar's silence was no longer fear of Rex. It was recognition of Claire. Recognition that beneath her quiet exterior lived a soldier who had faced worse than a gang of bikers and survived. In that moment, intimidation cracked. The balance of power shifted, not with violence, but with revelation. And every eye in Donovan's rest stop now saw Claire Donovan for who she really was. Not a waitress, not a victim, but Force Recon. For a heartbeat, Donovan's rest stop ceased to exist as a bar. It became a courtroom, a battlefield, a cathedral of silence. Of every sound vanished. The jukebox skipped, glasses paused halfway to mouths, and even the hum of the neon sign seemed to fade. All eyes were locked on Claire Donovan's back. The eagle, globe, and anchor stretched proudly across her shoulders, the words First Force Recon etched beneath in precise black ink. It wasn't just a tattoo, it was a flag unfurled. And to the veterans scattered among the booths, it was unmistakable. Force Recon, one of them breathed, the words escaping like a prayer. Another veteran, a man who had sat in that bar for years without speaking of his service, rose slowly to his feet. His eyes glistened, his hands trembled, not from fear but from memory. They knew what those words meant. The tip of the spear, the Marines' elite within the elite, the ones sent where others would not return. Sheriff Mark Callahan pushed back his chair. The scrape of wood on wood sounded louder than a gunshot in the silence. He was a man grizzled by his own deployments, his voice still carrying the authority of a platoon sergeant, even after decades behind a badge. He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Rex Malone. "That's enough," he said evenly. His tone wasn't raised, but it filled the room like a command on a battlefield. "Take your hand off her, now!" Rex stiffened. For the first time, his swagger faltered. His hands still gripped the torn fabric, but his fingers loosened. He looked around the room and realized, too late, that the crowd wasn't watching him anymore. They were watching her. That's when the truth dawned on him. He had miscalculated. Up until that moment, Rex had believed in a simple equation. Fear equals power. If you make people afraid enough, they'll fall in line. It had worked in every dive bar, every roadside diner, every place too beaten down to resist. But now he saw something different. This wasn't fear radiating back at him. It was respect. Respect for Claire Donovan, respect for the insignia inked into her skin, respect for the sacrifices only those who'd lived through fire could truly understand. And here lies the psychology of real authority. Fear can silence a room, yes, but respect transforms it. Fear makes people comply when you're present. Respect makes them follow even when you're not. Fear fades the moment someone stronger arrives. Respect endures because it's earned, not forced. Rex Malone was discovering this the hard way. His brand of power, the kind built on threats, fists, and intimidation, was paper thin when placed beside the quiet authority of someone who had earned her place in history through blood and scars. He could scare a bartender, frighten a civilian, maybe even buy compliance with violence. But he couldn't command the heart of a Marine Corps veteran. And in Donovan's rest stop, hearts were already shifting away from him, toward her. Claire hadn't spoken yet. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more weight than Rex's threats ever could. Every scar carved into her skin told a story no bravado could erase. Every veteran in that bar stood taller because of her presence, as if the insignia on her back had given them permission to remember their own courage. Rex finally let go. The torn fabric fluttered to the floor like a surrender flag. His face flickered between anger, disbelief, and something he hadn't felt in years: doubt. Sheriff Callahan's hand rested casually near his phone, but he didn't need to reach for it. The true shift had already happened. The Desert Vultures weren't the predators anymore. They were prey who had stumbled into the wrong territory. And Rex, for all his menace, finally realized what kind of warrior he had tried to break. The tension broke not with a gunshot, not with fists, but with silence. Rex Malone's grip slipped away as the torn fabric dropped like a white flag between him and Claire Donovan. For a moment he stood there frozen, shoulders heaving, his eyes searching hers for something: fear, weakness, surrender. He found none. Behind him, the Desert Vultures shifted uneasily. Their earlier smirks and jeers had evaporated, leaving only a hollow uncertainty. One of them coughed, another muttered something under his breath. None of them moved to back their leader. The swagger that had carried them into Donovan's rest stop now weighed heavy on their boots. Claire didn't chase the silence with words. She simply adjusted her torn shirt, straightened her posture, and looked Rex square in the eyes. Not with anger, not with vengeance, just with a calm so steady it made his fury look childish. "You've done enough," Sheriff Callahan said, his voice measured but firm. "Now take your boys and walk out." Rex opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came. What could he say? That he hadn't meant it? That it was all a misunderstanding? Excuses would only deepen his humiliation. Slowly, with a scowl meant to mask his defeat, he turned. "Let's ride," he barked. The words carried no weight. His men obeyed, but not out of loyalty, out of desperation to escape the suffocating atmosphere that now clung to them. Boots thudded. Jackets brushed past tables. Engines outside roared back to life one by one. And then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the Desert Vultures were gone, leaving only the smell of exhaust and the memory of how quickly bravado can collapse. Inside, no one cheered. No one jeered. The bar remained hushed, as though everyone sensed that to fill the silence with noise would diminish the gravity of what they'd just witnessed. Claire moved quietly back to her station, picking up the cloth she'd dropped earlier. She resumed wiping the same table she'd been cleaning before Rex Malone made the mistake of underestimating her. And that's the truth about real strength. It doesn't scream, it whispers. Loud strength, the kind Rex embodied, relies on volume, on spectacle, on forcing others to recognize it. But whispering strength is different. It doesn't demand attention, it earns it. It radiates through calm, through control, through the refusal to escalate when escalation is expected. Think about it. The loudest person in the room is often the most insecure. The one who waves weapons or raises their voice is usually trying to convince themselves as much as everyone else. But the person who doesn't need to shout, the one who can endure insult without flinching, who can face threat without trembling, that's the kind of strength that transforms entire rooms. Claire didn't need to beat Rex Malone. She only needed to be herself, and that was enough to undo him. The veterans in the bar exchanged glances of recognition. They had seen this before, in firefights, in foxholes, in the moments when panic spread, and only the calm voice, the steady hand, could cut through the chaos. Claire Donovan hadn't won a fight that night. She'd simply reminded everyone what true authority looks like. The following nights at Donovan's rest stop felt different. Patrons still came for beer, burgers, and a break from the desert wind, but the atmosphere had shifted. What was once just another roadside bar had become something else entirely. Something sacred. The silence that had followed Rex Malone's retreat never quite faded. Instead, it transformed into a quiet respect that lingered in the air, as if the walls themselves remembered. Veterans began returning more frequently. Men who once sat alone at the edges of the room now found themselves sharing tables, swapping stories they hadn't spoken aloud in years. Claire Donovan never asked for their tales, but her presence, the ink and scars that spoke of survival, seemed to give permission. She moved from table to table with her usual efficiency, never probing, never pressing, yet every nod, every refill, carried the weight of acknowledgement. I see you. You're not invisible here. Soon the walls began to change. At first it was small, a single photograph of a Marine in uniform tucked into a frame near the jukebox. Then came a patch from an old unit, nailed carefully beside the bar. A purple heart in a shadow box, a folded flag from a funeral service. Veterans began bringing mementos, each one a piece of history, each one a testimony. The bar transformed into a living museum, not of glory, but of sacrifice. Every artifact was a whisper. We were here. We endured. We remember. Tyler, once jittery and unsure, started to walk with more confidence. He saw the shift firsthand, saw how one woman's quiet strength had given an entire community a new anchor. Even Sheriff Callahan, who had always carried himself with authority, seemed to relax when he stopped by. He didn't need to patrol Donovan's rest stop anymore. The place policed itself, not out of fear, but out of shared respect. And that's the beauty of courage. It doesn't end when the confrontation is over. One act, one moment of unshakable resolve ripples outward in ways no one can fully predict. Claire hadn't set out to transform Donovan's into a safe haven. She hadn't asked for a following or for reverence. But by standing calmly against intimidation, she planted something far more powerful than fear: trust. Fear dies the moment its source leaves the room. Trust, once earned, stays and multiplies. That night when Rex Malone tore her shirt, Claire showed everyone that strength doesn't always roar. It can be silent, steady, and unyielding. And from that silence, Donovan's rest stop became more than a bar. It became a refuge where veterans could breathe, where stories could be shared, and where civilians learned that heroism isn't always loud. It was a slow Tuesday night when Tyler finally asked the question that had been circling his mind since Rex Malone's retreat. The bar was nearly empty, just a few regulars nursing beers while the jukebox hummed in the background. Claire was wiping down the counter when Tyler leaned in, voice low but earnest. "Why hide it?" he asked. "Why let people think you're just a server when you're, well, that?" He gestured vaguely, as if the tattoo on her back and the scars she carried were still visible to him, even beneath her shirt. Claire paused, cloth in hand, eyes fixed on the glass she was polishing. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she set the glass aside and looked at him, her gaze steady but soft. "Because, Tyler, I didn't want to be defined by war. I wanted to know if I could exist without it. If I could be just Claire, the woman who makes sure your coffee's hot and your tables are clean. I've already spent too many years being Gunnery Sergeant Donovan. I came here to remember what peace feels like." Sheriff Callahan, seated at his usual corner booth, had been listening. He stood and walked over, his weathered face carrying the same mixture of respect and sorrow. "She's right, kid," he said quietly. "You don't come home from war the same person you were when you left. Some of us keep talking about it until people stop listening. Some of us drink ourselves into silence. And some, like Claire, just want to live without explaining what every scar means." Claire gave him a small nod, then turned back to Tyler. "The truth is, blending in isn't easy. Veterans don't stop being soldiers. We just try to tuck it away. The habits, the memories, the losses, they follow us like shadows. Sometimes people thank you for your service. Sometimes they look at you like you're broken. Either way, you're not just you anymore. You're the war they imagine when they see you. And here lies the struggle so many veterans face. How do you live in a world that will never fully understand what you've seen, yet insists on defining you by it? Some find peace in talking, others in hiding. Claire chose the latter, until fate, and a torn shirt, forced her truth into the open. She didn't regret it, not anymore. But she wanted Tyler to understand one thing. Strength wasn't about carrying her past on display. Strength for her was about choosing when to let it speak, and when to let silence hold the weight instead. In the end, Claire Donovan's story isn't just about a biker gang or a bar on the edge of the desert. It's about how easily we misjudge the people around us. To the world, she looked ordinary, quiet, small, someone who blended into the background. Yet beneath that surface was a warrior who had carried burdens most of us will never know, and who chose peace over pride. That's the lesson worth holding on to. Never judge by appearance. Strength doesn't always look like muscle or bravado. Sometimes it looks like calm eyes in the middle of chaos or a steady hand when others tremble. Sometimes it's the person you least expect who carries the deepest reserves of courage. And maybe that's where this story meets you. Because it isn't just about Claire. It's about all of us, how we see others and how we see ourselves. How often do we dismiss the quiet coworker, the humble neighbor, the stranger who never speaks up, assuming they have nothing more to offer? How often do we hide our own scars, forgetting they are proof of survival, not weakness? So let me leave you with this. Have you ever met someone who turned out stronger than you imagined? Or maybe in a moment you didn't expect, you discovered that strength in yourself? Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you found meaning here, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that strength often hides in plain sight. Because at the end of the day, it's not just Claire's story, it's a story about us, about resilience, and about the quiet power that still shapes America today.